Hello, and thanks for joining us for this video case tip. I'm Brynne McBride of ABC for Health. Today we're taking a quick look at the state's new demonstration waiver to make changes to BadgerCare Plus, mostly for childless adults. Now, we do have an information button. We have a bunch of resources and the waiver request itself that you can take a look at by clicking on the information button. You can also use that link to send us an email. Let's do a quick recap. What are we talking about here when we say there's a Section 1115 waiver request out there? Well, there's actually a provision of the Social Security Act called Section 1115 that allows states to ask the federal government to make changes to their Medicaid program. It's referred to usually as a demonstration waiver. The state says, I can demonstrate that we can make changes to our Medicaid program beyond what the federal government allows right now, to show that we can improve care and services for the people in our Medicaid program. The feds have to approve this before they can be implemented. Now, the Department of Health Services has submitted such a waiver request. It was prepared and released on April 19th. Before they can send it to the feds, however, they do have to allow you to comment on it. There is a public comment period that has just started and runs through May 19th. We'll share a little bit of information in just a second on how you can provide some comment if you're interested. Once it goes to the federal government, the feds have their own public comment period, and there's a second opportunity to weigh in on these changes before it then could ultimately be approved or returned to the state for suggestions to make changes or denied. In this particular request, let's take a couple look at the elements included, and some of these will look familiar to you from 2 years ago. The state of Wisconsin has requested some of these changes in the past, and the then Obama administration said, no, you cannot implement these changes. A lot of them have been dusted off, resurrected, and now appear in this new waiver request. Now, not all waiver requests are good or are bad per se. A lot of them are saying we want to try some enhancements to our programs. We want to cover populations that aren't traditionally covered. Covering childless adults under 100% in BadgerCare Plus was itself a waiver request several years ago. This waiver that is being introduced on April 19th says we want to make some changes to how those services are delivered for that childless adult population. Now, some of you might consider these to be not as positive as the original childless adult waiver request was written. Here are some of the elements it includes. Monthly premiums for childless adults ranging from $1 to $10 a month. There is a carve-out for the very low income between 0 and 20% of the federal poverty level. But for someone who's not making too much money, does not have any income, or doesn't have a bank account set up or the ability to write checks, even that $1 premium amount each month just serves as that administrative hoop or hurdle in the pathway for that person connecting to services. Adds a layer of complexity and administrative burden to this as well. There are costs associated for frequent users of the emergency room, another instance where we see the department asking for childless adults to have a little bit more skin in the game, as they call it. If you use the emergency room once, there's a certain copay associated with it. If you're found to be a more frequent user, that charge goes up. There's drug testing. We've seen this before. It's appeared through other states. It's been denied traditionally by the federal government up until now. We'll see what happens. Drug testing has been determined to be illegal in other litigation, so it's something that is a big question mark for the state. The state of Wisconsin has asked that it be an element so they could then determine if they want to refer people for drug treatment. Now, the motivation behind trying to get folks in Wisconsin into great treatment and behavioral and AODA services is honorable. Having it be an eligibility criteria is a different story, and so this is an element you will see throughout the waiver request, asking that drug testing happens. If people refuse a drug test, they are denied services. They're denied BadgerCare Plus. If they are found to be positive, referred for services, and refuse those treatment services, they will be denied BadgerCare Plus. So there's a lot of fine print that goes along with this drug testing requirement. There's also something that we saw before that the Obama administration refused, and this was limiting how long someone could receive benefits. This waiver request asks that benefits only run for 48 months for childless adults if they're not working. They have to be in a working treatment or a working training program, or have full employment that meets a minimum threshold of hours. If they don't, then they will be terminated from the program with restrictive re-enrollment that lasts 6 months. There is a residential treatment addition. Now, this is really interesting, and there's a lot of commentary in our last Health Watch Wisconsin Update newsletter that we provided on the concept of residential treatment. The waiver request includes this as a Medicaid covered service. That is great. Residential treatment should be a Medicaid covered service. Some would actually argue it is a covered service right now and the state is just not enforcing it. This would be through some mental health parity legislation and laws that exist right now that should extend to all Medicaid enrollees. We would ask the state of Wisconsin to start enforcing those rules that impact all citizens on BadgerCare Plus and Medicaid so that they could get that residential treatment. Short of that, this waiver request asks that residential treatment be an option for folks that went through that drug testing protocol and are finding their way to some substance abuse treatment programs. This is something that a lot of people, I'm sure, will be commenting on when they're submitting their comments to the state and then again to the feds. So let's talk now about what your options are if you wanted to weigh in on this new waiver request. You are time limited. You have until May 19th, but the ways to do it are quite easy, and I'll give you the contact information in just a second. You can do it on paper, you can send an email, but I wanted to call your attention to two public hearings on this waiver request, April 26th in Wausau and May 1st in Milwaukee. On that information button, we take you to the waiver where they spell out the location and the times of these public hearings. If you're interested in going and speaking at these events, these are the two opportunities you have to do just that. Here's where you can write your written comments. You can send it to the Department of Health Services P.O. Box, as we have displayed on the screen. You can also send an email, and we have that email address. We also have that address linked up in our information button, so you can click on it, and you can put your comment right in the body of an email. A lot of people find this to be a really accessible way to share their thoughts. You don't have to comment on the whole waiver. You can comment on pieces of it. You can comment on whether this is a demonstration at all, if it meets the spirit or the letter of what is intended through Section 1115 waivers. Is it really demonstrating anything new? Is it enhancing services and program delivery for everybody on Medicaid? You can weigh in on that element of it, or you can just pick drug testing and just talk about that. This is the opportunity for you to provide comment. It doesn't have to be footnoted. It can be opinion. It has to be concise, and it should be constructive. Please don't go off the rails and do a rant. We want this to be constructive to help inform the department of how they can make good changes for the people of the state of Wisconsin or preserve program elements that should be kept. Now, you will also have an opportunity to do this once the feds get a copy of that waiver. We'll come back, we'll do another video case tip and tell you about that process when we get there. In the meantime, go ahead, read some of the information on the waiver, and the last link we have available for you is the full copy of what will be sent to the feds in May. Thank you for joining us for this video case tip.